to have others guide me here. You know, I stopped at, I don't know, what was it, algebra, I don't know, quantitative reasoning, but this was tough to find. So thank you just in that. My name is David Kilpatrick, and this is Chuck Carlson.
Chuck Carlson. I think you all, I know most of you. So, I don't know, do you want to introduce your...
Yeah, so again, my name is David Kilpatrick. I'm professor of English and director of the sport management program at Mercy University. I'm director of adult soccer operations for Eastern FC. And the reason I'm here is that since November of 2012, I was named the club historian for the New York Cosmos.
So I'm Chuck Carlson. I am the club historian for Chicago House. As I see our house community, thank you for showing up, our first coach back there as well, so thank you. I am also a new board member for the Society of American Soccer History. So just was elected a couple weeks ago, so this is the first opportunity to share all of my love of history with as many people as possible, and my belief that by knowing our history, we can better build communities for American soccer, and that American soccer has an incredibly long and actually very, very rich history that is quite diverse, and to keep that going as much as we can. So this is my opportunity to work with David to talk about that story.
Yeah, so those of you that have been coming to United Soccer Coaches Conventions, and before that when it was NCAA, know that there's always been that hour on Thursday afternoon that's kind of blocked off for SASH. Even when SASH wasn't really operational for a while there, right? There was still that hour, and the hour at what was then NCAA really helped us revive the organization. So, and again, Peter's in the room. I think the two of us are the only ones in the room that were in the room the last time it was in Chicago. So already we've, I think, 5 times the number of people that were in the room then, right? But yeah, again, we had that on the schedule, and we had it just as an open meeting, and we do want to have, you know, a nice sense of informality in here. Again, it's nice to reconnect with friends, and again, part of that time is about that as well. But we thought it would be best use of time if we did kind of have something to talk about in a way that would be something worth coming to the room for those that aren't necessarily old and dear friends. Those of you that may not know either one of us, or may not yet be members of the Society for American Soccer History, and to really talk about what it means to be embedded within a sporting entity as the historian, right? So we're both club historians. It could be your league, it could be your community, right? It could be
Could be your AYSO organization.
Your AYSO region, whatever it may be, right? The idea of what it takes to be a historian within that sport entity. I know that when I joined the Cosmos in November of 2012, it was really my hope, if not expectation, that it would just happen all over the country, and within 2-3 years, every single professional organization especially would have a historian. That hasn't really happened, but a few years later, I was really thrilled when Chuck was named club historian at Chicago House. And we think these are really 2 interesting case studies, right? In many ways, both of us were kind of coming on board when these clubs were like startups, right? But of course, Cosmos it was a reboot, right? Don't call it a comeback, right? Tom worked with me at Cosmos. It was the marketing campaign said, don't call it a reboot. But so we had a legacy that needed to be preserved and communicated and shared, right? But again, you know, kind of for me, the elephant in the room is, you know, I haven't written anything for the Cosmos in a year and a day. Anybody know what it was a year and a day ago that was the last thing I wrote for the Cosmos? Beckenbauer's passing, right? So a lot of what I've done for the last few years have been write obituaries, right? So right now with the Cosmos on hiatus, I'm not anticipating who's going to be in the starting 11 in the next match. I'm honestly looking who's going to be in the jury of 12 Monday. So the role of historian has changed a little bit since we did a session in November of 2020. Chuck was
I
new in
just
that
started,
role.
yeah.
I was at that point already kind of like seasoned and tarred and feathered and the whole works. And Tom just gave a smile like he knows exactly who tarred and feathered. But so we thought it'd be nice to kind of pick back up on that again. Hopefully inspire some of you to, if not do it yourself, acknowledge the value in your club or league or your community to have some kind of a formalized historian role. And then we want to just talk relatively informally about the ins and outs of what goes into being an historian at a sport entity. Again, this with a soccer focus, but it applies to any sporting entity. You could be a multi-sport club based, I think the Chicago Blackhawks actually have a club historian, at least they did for a while, right? I think he was named historian like a few months before I was. I don't know if they still do. Are there any Chicago Blackhawks fans?
Jim DiMaria, maybe?
Could
Old
be.
PR director.
That could be. And I think the Red Sox had two, but in Europe it's pretty common. It's very, very common. So we wanted to talk about the ins and the outs of that. And again, the ins in that are very much a matter of curation, and the outs are a matter of communication. So I think we kind of wanted to talk about the ins.
Right, and going back, and that other clubs do this around the world. Like I've traveled through Scotland, the UK, you'll meet the club historians. So the global element of soccer that exists in how you can use your connections to your local community to connect to a much wider community as well is an essential element of that.
Yeah, and there's a real wide variety of that too, right? Some places it's just a great honorary thing, right? Where somebody who's doing well enough takes on that role and they do this out of the goodness of their heart. Other clubs, it's a part-time job or a full-time job, right?
Like St. Pauli in Germany, a team I support and has a huge worldwide fan base. They have a club historian and he has 10 staff members. And as the historian for Chicago House, I was able to talk with him, get ideas like what I started with the club right at the beginning. You're the historian who came into St. Pauli, 75 years after founding of the club. What would you have wanted at the very beginning? What kind of records should be kept? What things are you missing in your collection that as someone just starting a brand new club can do? And he's like, oh yeah, if you can get more information about the individual players beyond the stats. And that's just before AR was telling the story to my brother who's sitting over there about how he joined Chicago House. I've been the club historian for Chicago House for 4 years. AR has been a player for Chicago House for 4 years. I had never heard that story. And that story is awesome, And so by keeping a record of what the players' lives are outside the field and outside the stats to carry on, to pass on to future generations was what I got from that person who has a staff of 10.
Yeah, so I remind you that etymologically the word care is related to the word cure and curiosity, right? They have that same etymological root. And so the basic question is, what are you supposed to care about, right? And there are some assumptions, I think, with a lot of historians. I made the joke about I didn't take calculus and it was tough to find the room. But there is a connection to that in terms of what we have to say, right? I'm not a numbers guy. I don't have a mind for numbers, and I don't have a very great statistical mindset. Sometimes people make that assumption that that's what the historian is supposed to be. As Tom can attest that, there were a couple directors at the Cosmos who that was their expectation. Whereas my background, my doctorate is actually in comparative literature, right? And so I'm much more of a narrative person. So, there's record keeping, and there's knowing who was in the starting 11, who came in as a substitute in what minute, and who scored the goals, and those types of elements to it. And that's important. And if that's what you really care about, then do that. Yeah, Tom.
How many goals did Pelé score?
Oh, yeah, that's a box. Yeah, that's a bobblehead question there. Actually, that's an interesting story too, right? But that's an interesting story in terms of the role in a very practical way, right? We had a series of bobbleheads, and of course, the first bobblehead had to be Pelé, right? And I was shown a draft of the box, and I said, oh, there's actually not being a number guy, I still did, no, that doesn't add up, that's not right, it was off by a goal, 2 goals, I can't remember what it was. So I gave them the changes, right? Game day, the bobbleheads are given out. I didn't really look at the box that carefully. By the time I got home from the stadium, there was already a complaint email. Kilpatrick doesn't know what he's talking about. Those numbers on the box are wrong. I looked at my box, I'm like, oh my God, those are the numbers I caught before they were supposed to catch, right? So you do take the blame, right? It becomes a matter of like, you're the person who's responsible for that. And now I had done my job, but then, a director is chewing me out who got the email. And I'm saying, oh, but I had to show the email. It's like, look, but you said, it's still on you. So that is part of it in terms of an official role, right? But some people are a little more geared towards that. They have those, again, I used to have that memorized when I was often put on the spot. I don't have that memorized anymore. That's a part of my brain that doesn't work. But I could tell you all about Clive Toye following Pelé all around the world trying to get his signature on a contract, right? So again, the stories or the data. If you're a data person, then great. Care about that, collect that. If you're more of a story person and you like the oral histories and you like talking to the people that have been with the club, whether it's a player, a coaching staff, front office staff, supporters, gathering their stories and telling the overall story. That's an element of it that a lot of people don't really even acknowledge as part of the historian role. And to me, that was really what
And I think one thing you had mentioned to me about the historian is Google. That someone can just type that in and find something. So you can type that question, how many goals did Pelé score? And Google will give you an answer, whether it's right or wrong. But with the stories of following, Pelé around the world, Clive Toye, doing that's not something you're going to be able to find on Google. And that's why a club historian can collect, and as we talked about, curate that information. And if you're interested in stats, if you're interested in specific numbers, that's great. Do that for your organization. Keep that information. But there's also an opportunity to tell more stories than just what the numbers are there. And that's where the work that I love about Chicago House is collecting that information beyond the day-to-day games.
And again, that speaks to the idea, the value of the historian role, right? Is that there is that kind of assumption that like, well, I can just look this up. Why do we need to allocate resources to this? When it's really though about collecting the stories and again, talking about meaning, right? How meaningful is it who scored the game-winning goal on August 15th, 1978? It could be meaningful for some people, but it's even more meaningful to talk about that to that person who it was their first game. Their mom took them to that game, and they were there that day, and they were kicking the ball around in the parking lot, and then they went inside, and they wanted the t-shirt, but they got the pennant in this incredibly meaningful event, really, because what the historian does is more than anything, it preserves the legacy, preserves the meanings of the club and collecting meaning. And I think that's something more significant than just the statistics that many people associate with it.
And that's this is my first conference, so I went to the first timers thing yesterday, and the first phrase out of the president's mouth was, this organization is about volunteerism and history. And so it was like, you're recognizing that the historic, and he went on to talk about being here this 45 years and how important, and my first thought is, who's keeping track of that? Where is the archive that exists that gives the information for future people to understand what has happened? So a bit on the practical side, I wanted to move to that. Like the first year of Chicago House, we were a NISA team, so we were a professional team, and when any home game, I would go to the game with a microphone, and I'd go into the parking lot before the game where fans were gathering, supporters, and I'd try to pick out a variety of different people. Because to me, the fans are an important element of the community too. So how can I document what the fans are thinking. So I came up with a list of 5 questions, and I would read the mission statement of Chicago House, which is really central to why I enjoy Chicago House and believe in Chicago House. And so I'd read that mission statement to these fans, and I'd say, what do you think of this? And then they'd talk for a minute or 3 minutes or whatever. But so I was able to collect what were the people like who came to Chicago House in 2021, our first season. What were they excited to see? And so I have that oral history document, and I have that from every home game from our very, very first season. Now, do I use that? Do I refer to that now? No. But hopefully in 20 years, in 30 years, when House is celebrating their 30th anniversary, someone can go back and listen to those and can use that information for the future. So the idea of preserving people at the time is to me an essential element of being a club historian.
The digitization of newspapers has really been a godsend for many people who are curious about American soccer history, right? I like to say that to be a club historian, you need to be a bit of a magpie. And if you know anything about bird behavior, right, magpies are always collecting things and taking them back to their nest, right? I really, in some ways, started as club historian back in October of 1977. The first thing I collected as Cosmos historian, if you will, was a replica coin that was tossed for Pelé's farewell game on October 1st. Right? That was really the first material culture object that I started collecting, and I started collecting and collecting and collecting and collecting. But when I was a junior into senior year of high school, the Cosmos stopped playing. That didn't mean I just got rid of my stuff, right? Fortunately, I kept it. The week after the World Cup ended in Brazil, I was speaking at Oxford University, and they wanted me to talk about the state of soccer in the United States. And I said, American soccer can really be characterized by 3 A's: amnesia, antagonism, and apologetics. Amnesia, antagonism, and apologetics. And the amnesia bit more than anything else, this idea that American soccer lacks a history, right? Digitization is allowing us to see back in the 1880s, the vibrant soccer scene that was happening, into the 1890s, and again, those golden years that Colin Josephs talked about with the ASL in the 1920s. But you go back and you look at what's been digitized, we know the names of the players, we know who scored the goals. What we don't know is the fan culture. That's one thing that's really been lost. We don't know the meaning behind those. So we may know that Davy Brown played for the New York Giants, and when the New York Giants rebranded to the New York Soccer Club, then Indiana Flooring became the New York Giants. So we know Davy Brown transferred from the Giants to the Giants. But what we don't know is what happened to the fans. Did the fans go with Davy Brown or not? So we both feel really strongly that understanding the meanings that have played in terms of the fans, that your collection needs to be along with that. But in terms of collection, I'm just curious. I know, like I said, I mentioned that material culture object of the coin.
Yep.
And I've got, my Cosmos jersey from when I was a kid, and my Cosmos Kickers fan club card from the 1980s and everything. What are some of the material culture objects that you've collected for Chicago House?
It's very funny that you asked that, because I was looking at the house archive is currently at my house, and so I was thinking, what are the objects? I looked. I don't know if you noticed as you came in here, there's a slideshow of pictures of historic, but there's a picture of the Celtic in Glasgow of their trophy room. And it's this incredibly gorgeous wood filled with all kinds of things. And I was like, I believe that house will eventually be like that there will be this. But so what do I have right now? I have the champagne bottle from when House defeated Valhalla in the Open Cup in the 4th round to qualify for the Open Cup proper. And so there's a great photo, AR was here, there's a great photo of AR splashing that champagne. And so it's an idea of how you keep that object, but that object tells an unbelievably different story. and the people behind it. So my vision for the future is I'm going to set down that champagne bottle that has the score and the date and the time. There's the picture of AR spraying that exact champagne bottle, and then there's the story of how did House get to where it is, and how did AR end up as the captain of House. And so that bottle becomes a way to tell a story that connects to the next community. Everyone can understand the celebration of winning a game, and that champagne bottle is meaningless without the context. And so that's my
Well, so,
my
a
exciting-
question to many of you right now, it's kind of as a rhetorical question. So maybe you're working with a primarily youth club, but maybe your U13 girls go off to a tournament on Memorial Day weekend and they win the tournament. Is there a trophy given? Where does that trophy go? Does it go to the coach? Does it go back to the president of the club? Where does that trophy go? Does it get stuck in somebody's attic? What happens to it, right? The player medals, right? Those things, right? If you have somebody designated at your club to at least take some kind of photographic documentation of it, right? So if you don't actually have a trophy case like Celtic, right, where you can have these things collected, if you don't have a clubhouse for these things to be gathered in, right, that at least you have some kind of a digital collection of that. And again, if your uniforms change through the years, right, how are you keeping track of, with Eastern, right, I had a conversation with the president a week and a half ago about when did you start wearing the all red uniforms? What was the reason you were, right? There were reasons why they wore the white, the blue, and the white, and they wear the red. And he was telling me the year, right? But to collect those stories that people know. And so that when the players are then coming up in a very basic sense, explaining to the 12-year-olds what the meaning of their badge is, right? Or you're going to this tournament. Well, a few years ago, that team won that. Having that kind of institutional memory really inspires the players and adds to their sense of the significance of their actions. And so, when it's material object collection, again, hopefully you've got a study or an attic or somewhere where you can be collecting these things. Or if people have them in different, in disparate locations, still trying to keep some track of it and then understanding, okay, let's have a policy as a club. When we win a tournament, what are we doing with that trophy? Not just have it be random, but to actually say this is what we want to do because we want to preserve institutional memory.
Right. No, and I think as part of Chicago House, being that it was a brand new club, had the very fortunate opportunity to delve into Illinois soccer history. And so as part of that, I travel throughout the state of Illinois and I go to local historical societies and they'll bring out a trophy, that is from 1912, the Illinois Valley Conference trophy, and it's just in a corner of a small, local museum, but that it's not giving it context is something that's totally missing. Like, which team actually won that? Well, it's not written on the trophy, so I don't know. I still don't know which team's trophy that is. Being a club historian, having that within your organization, you'll be able to identify items like that so they don't get lost. And so many players and family members of players. I recently was talking to the daughter of a gentleman who played from 1922 to 1950. His name is Tom Scott. He was a Scottish international who moved to Chicago, played in the Open Cup finals, a complete champion, talking to his 90-year-old daughter who was telling me about when she'd go see her father play, and going to Sparta Stadium, which was filled for these Open Cup finals. Well, what was that like as a 7-year-old girl going to the Sparta Stadium? And she said, the Sparta Stadium was a dump. I remember it smelled. I remember, my mom would make me wear a kilt to the games, and it's like, wait, your mom would make you wear a kilt to the games. Why was that? And she's like, well, I think because the club was Czech, and so she wanted me to be representing my Scottish identity within this community. And so that's an amazing, I was like, what? She didn't realize she was telling an enlightening story. She just thought, I had to wear a kilt. That was no fun. But then the story she's telling, and so now when I look at pictures of the Sparta Stadium, have a completely different view and can tell another story from a 7-year-old child, and particularly a 7-year-old girl in a man's world. And as we've seen in this conference, how the number of women involved in soccer has exploded and why that's so important and how it saves the game, how it improves the game in the country.
Yes, I think both Chuck and I really share this special love for the oral histories, right? That it more than, I love collecting every jersey, every T-shirt, every match program, anything I can get my hands on, right? And sometimes when I go onto eBay to look for more, I think my wife is actually selling what I'm looking at, and I wouldn't blame her. But really, it's the oral histories more than anything else where you really get a sense of the meaning. And I have to say, like in terms of the Cosmos, with the suspension of play in 1984, for a lot of the players, right, sitting down and interviewing them, that's where we really developed amazing friendships. And then, they may have, not been playing for the club for decades, but then they reconnect in that really significant, meaningful way. And the things that you learn are really absolutely astounding. And I can't overstate how valuable that is, but not just with the players, not just the coaches, again, really the surrounding fan culture. Or again, say it's a youth club. Don't stop with just the players, right? The parents too are really valuable resources in terms of what everything means to them and the meanings that are at stake.
Well, one of the earlier sessions I was in was talking about the marketing aspects of the women's game. And they kept talking about history and mentioning the history, and they started with 2012 for the history of the women's game. Which, yes, that is true for a certain league, that's correct. But there is a much, much wider body of history that's completely local that can be investigated by local clubs. And that's why it's important. It's not just the professional level, it's every level below it that builds the community that's a base for the professional level, that holds the professional level up. So,
yeah. Well, I think that's another thing too, especially if you're with a relative startup too, that you should kind of take on the obligation of trying to know everything you can about the history of the game in your region. So with that, I stumbled into like year one of being a historian with the Cosmos. I found out that there was a club in 1890, started up in 1890, called the Cosmopolitan Association Football Club. But Cosmopolitan's a long word, so guess what they called them in the newspapers in New York? The Cosmos. Now that was something that they didn't know in 1971 when the Cosmos started up. They didn't know they were second New York Cosmos. That Cosmos team played really popular games in front of thousands of fans against Philadelphia All-Star teams in 1890 that really, and in 1891 on Thanksgiving Day, that really ended up kickstarting the first professional leagues in 1894. So it's this kind of thing where, again, everything new has really already been there, or what's the phrase I'm trying to think of here with it, but when you take on that obligation and you start looking back, the things that we find out are really, really quite amazing. So that covers a lot of the ins,
right,
in terms of curation. So I want to just talk a little bit about the outs. So again, curation is the in, communication is the out.
Yeah.
So how were you communicating with your Chicago House fans?
So it definitely has been the social media. I mean, that's the reality. It does allow people from all over the world. I've been able to connect with historians from Ghana, with historians from Russia, with historians from Scotland, from the UK, through my social media posts about Chicago House history. And so it really is the global game. And you find out by posting, I'm currently moving to Blue Sky at the moment and using Facebook as well to communicate what I'm finding out about the history, but also what Chicago House is doing currently, where Chicago House's history. We got a 5-year anniversary coming up shortly, so that's a chance to go back into the archives and find out what are the stories that I've completely forgotten about that are in there. And I was also going to get into the importance of keeping physical records, that the digital record disappears. And so keeping physical records, keeping an actual archive will benefit any historian who's talking about putting in a club historian?
Yeah, I've probably written nearly, if not more than 100 articles for the Cosmos, but I would say probably about half of those disappeared in an ownership transition, right? As ownership and league transition. I think maybe the switch from NASL to NPSL Pro, or the NISA switch, some transition in there, a lot was lost, right? So you want to keep back up for a lot. Again, with the NASL, a lot of those great match summaries and stuff like that, the kind of fact-based things that I didn't back up. I don't have access to. I just assumed they'd always be there, and they're not always there. But one great thing about the social media accounts, though, right? So maybe we've lost some of those match reports, but at least the social media accounts are there. So I can still go back and use those in an archive way too, right? They're still leaving that digital footprint, if you will. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, in addition to the social media, of course, then, having a historian, a designated historian really can serve as a media contact. So a lot of what I had to do in my role would be to take questions from, and I still do pretty much on a weekly basis, actually, still for the Cosmos, fielding queries from media all around the world. It just gives a point person that can speak with authority on the subject. And again, that could again be at the most local level though too. So say you're going to have a soccer fest or something like that. Who's the person who can speak to? How long has the club been active in the community? And somebody who has a knowledge base that can speak truth in the media.
And that key point that David, I think, is saying there is the truth. When going to some of these communities in central Illinois and reading about how in 1909 the Liverpool soccer team, who were the world champions, came and played in Coal City, Illinois. The first time I read that, I was like, oh wow, this is incredible, Liverpool. And then reading a story written 20 years ago that said, yeah, the Liverpool team, who is now at the top of the Premier League, came and played in this local, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's completely false. That is incorrect information. There was a team from England called the Pilgrims who toured all over America, and that story is actually even better than if Liverpool, the world champions, had came. So keeping an accurate record, allowing an accurate record to be told, gives faith in truth as well. So as historians, we're always looking for truth. And so this is a way of ensuring your club is telling its true story.
Although sometimes, and I know this is something we've talked about a lot privately, right? Sometimes when you're doing these oral histories, you'll get different versions, kind of the Rashomon effect, right? And sometimes, I know, certainly with the Cosmos, it's the myths that are really compelling, right? The stories that maybe shouldn't really go public until people have passed away, there's some really, really great stuff there, even in terms of people remembering it this way, people remembering it that way.
How do you think the movie about the Cosmos has affected, the fact that it got out there? Did that impact you as a historian at all?
Yeah, I came on board, it was at Green Street Films, and our first office was on Green Street, It played a huge role, right? That film really helped kickstart the revival of the club, but it told a certain story, right? It told a certain story in almost melodramatic, monochromatic, heroes and villains way, right? And in understanding, Tom McCabe, who's the immediate prior president of SASH, has a phrase I love to quote. He says it all the time: complicate the narrative, right? So sometimes it's teasing out the ambiguities that can be really rich terrain in terms of the meaning. But and along with that too, in terms of the communication, right? So external can be, communication can be external with media and things like that. It can also be internal, right? It could be meeting with your sales team if your club has ticketing and things like that. Meeting with individual trainers or coaches within your club, making sure they know what they're part of, right? That then becomes your designated role to communicate the mission, vision, and values. Sometimes, right, Tom? sometimes the mission or the vision or the values can change. And you can almost kind of take a stance of, wait a second, if we go in that direction, are we doing it this way, right? It would be unthinkable for the Cosmos to all of a sudden start wearing a red jersey, right? But understanding, oh, we've never done that, or we have done that, but something as kind of superficial as club colors, which may not be superficial to some people. But again, understanding very clearly the mission, the vision, and the values. So you're not just a custodian for all these facts and all these materials. More than anything, you need to know mission, vision, and values. And I will say this, if your club does not have a mission statement, if your club does not have a vision statement, if your club doesn't have a very clear sense of values, sit down in a workshop and flesh it out. Flesh it out. It's a lot easier joining a club that has that really clearly articulated.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Anything else that you want to talk about should we
Open it up for questions?
Anybody have any questions or
thoughts?
Anyone in the room who has a club where maybe you thought about it and you're not sure about how you would go about that, or any questions or comments? Anyone in the room?
Could I take this opportunity to increase your tangible archive of house memorabilia?
Absolutely.
It's appropriate that Sonny from Tulsa is here, and I have the century USASA Amateur Cup coin that was used in the Great Flip to determine the US Open Cup hosting team.
So Peter, why don't you explain the Great Flip? Not everyone may know what the Great Flip is.
We're one. There's a story behind that coin even.
Right.
Please give the background of how we came to meet in Union, Missouri.
Well, it's important to note that Peter and I are idiots. Like, I think that needs to be on record first. We have a different kind of mind, and I think one thing that American soccer lacks a little bit is it's all very serious, and we get away from having fun a little bit, and that's why I stay in contact with Peter, and we always kick around silly ideas. But when we found out that we were drawn against Chicago House, rather than leaving it in the hands of the Federation, it probably would have suited me better because Oklahoma's likely to have better weather in December than Chicago. I said, well, why don't we make it a 50-50 thing? Let's meet halfway and either do like a series of board games or darts or whatever, or a coin flip. And I think that's just where the idea was born. And we kicked it around, and Peter did the due diligence reaching out to the community of Union, Missouri, which is exactly halfway between Tulsa, Oklahoma and Chicago, Illinois. And that's kind of the backstory.
So to give it a quick context for anyone who doesn't know, Chicago House played Tulsa Athletic in the 4th round to qualify for the US Open Cup proper. Both of us a couple of years ago had gone the furthest. Chicago House made it to the 3rd round of the Open Cup proper. Tulsa Athletic had also made it to the 3rd round of the Open Cup proper. So these were two very much Open Cup teams playing each other. And it seemed like a great opportunity when these two teams were meeting each other to do something exciting for where the game should be.
So when we met in Union to hold the coin toss, and the city administrator of Union, Missouri, gave us access to their
city, it wasn't city council, it was the chambers.
It was the chambers,
Yeah.
yeah, so the city council.
The city council chambers.
Council
right.
chambers to hold this, and the city administrator was going to flip the coin. I brought this 100th anniversary amateur cup coin to be flipped, and then we had said, well, who gets to call heads or tails? So he said, well, we have to flip to decide who gets that. I had brought a second coin. It was in the Chicago Sting 1981 NASL Soccer Bowl Championship coin.
That's a bad memory for me, but okay, yeah.
It's a good memory for me.
Yeah.
Yes, it was September 26, 1981.
Oh.
And I did allow.
Your move, David.
Shoot out. It was a shame. Yeah.
I did allow Sonny to make the call on that first coin flip.
Yeah.
You called
I called tails. I call tails or heads.
heads.
That's why I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed because I was going to call heads. But he called heads.
Yeah,
and
that's right. That's right,
Indeed,
he called heads.
in good land head, so he got to choose.
I won the right to make a 50-50 call.
And again, you chose.
I went heads. I was like, look, if you're gonna beat our club, you gotta beat our club. So I went heads.
And I said, tails never fails. And this came up tails. So Chuck, I'd like to present
That's
this.
perfect.
to
I
you
will,
for the archive.
yes, thank you. This will definitely, and this story is documented, so we have proof.
And while we're on the subject of material culture, right, Peter, you mind just telling everybody that ring on your right hand?
CJ has one. I rotate rings. CJ has one of these as well. And I would not have this without CJ. Chicago Fire's inaugural season. We're an expansion team. The league was Major League Soccer was only around for 2 years. But nevertheless, we in Miami Fusion were the two expansion teams, and not much was expected of us that first year. And we used our first pick in the supplemental draft to select C.J. Brown. And he and head coach Bob Bradley helped lead us to not only the MLS Cup championship that year, but also the U.S. Open Cup, the double. And this ring is the championship ring from that year.
It's one thing I always do with all the Cosmos. When they wear their rings, I'd always take a photo of it, right? And it's always interesting what year they would choose and stuff like that. And the difference in rings, right, from 1972 and then 1977, a really big difference in the ring.
It's a tangible memory. To bring back the memories, I have a colleague from England, and he laments that rings are not part of European soccer culture, that medals are, but not rings. And he likes that, and he wishes that they had rings.
Well, one thing, I know I mentioned this to you last week. I was born in upstate New York, then moved to Memphis, Tennessee, came back to upstate New York, and I went to, my father had played soccer in the school that I had started school at, and he played there in the late 1950s. I came back, went to the next school district over, and they said, do you have a question? And I said, yeah, when does soccer start? And I don't understand. I said, when did soccer start? Or when does soccer start? I don't understand your question. I said, there's goals outside. I see them. He goes, oh, that's a girls' game. And I turned to my mother and what have you got me into, right? Several years later, they started up boys varsity soccer for the first time in what year? 1994. So there I was as an assistant coach on that inaugural season, right? And was really proud to finally, we had a soccer club, but they wouldn't have us to Canajoharie. Jack Huckle's in the room, and he knows where that is on the map since we live nearby. So in 1994, we thought we were starting boys soccer, right? When my son, then years later, in 2001, became the head varsity coach at my old high school, the boys varsity program, I started just doing a little bit of digging around in local history. Lo and behold, Canajoharie had a boys varsity soccer program in 1947. Right, so some of these things that you can find out. So I would want to leave you with this. The value for a sport entity cannot be measured. It can do wonders for you. It can do real wonders for the significance of everybody involved. And move, even when they move beyond your program, that'll keep that connection, right? So that your program becomes not just a program for a certain period of time, but a program for life, right? But also, even if you do not, if the club that you love doesn't see the value of it because they can look whatever up on Google, don't stop there. Keep digging, the things you'll find out, all of the things we're talking about, even if you're just setting up your own social media account or whatever to then, you take in the inputs, you got that stuff in the closet, share it. So the ins and the outs of a historian for a club, a league, in your community, strongly advocate that. But even if you aren't working within an institution in kind of preserving its memory and celebrating its mission, vision, and values, still you can be doing this on your own, and it can still be really meaningful.
Absolutely. Any other another question?
It's more of a comment that goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about having more clubs having their own historians, so that next time there's a meeting like this, it's not 2 of you, there's 10 of you or 20 of you. And I think a path to getting there is proactive outreach to, I'll say, retired club PR personnel.
Yeah.
I think in terms of, you mentioned the Blackhawks historian earlier, I'm pretty sure it was longtime PR director Jim DeMaria that became their historian. The New York Mets, Jay Horowitz, I think, is a longtime PR director. When he retired, he didn't really want to leave the club, and they made him the club historian. Because of the nature of that position, he has access to records and information, and much of it he documented along the way as the PR personnel. In Green Bay, the Packers, the club historian, is a longtime writer, Chris Crystal. And so I think maybe, which, you know, here I am volunteering you guys to do the work, but if you're trying to expand your membership, proactive, look at who the PR folks were in these various clubs, or maybe are in these PR clubs. An active one, Jeff Crandall, many of you know Jeff, former media relations executive with the Chicago Fire, and became their de facto club historian because he cared so much about the history of the Chicago Fire. He went on to US Soccer as a content manager for the national team, and his passion is about the history of US soccer, and he's offered to become the documenter of American soccer history within the walls of Soccer House.
Well, I think you also bring up an excellent point that there is an incredible resource for anyone who wants to start up as a historian within their organization. Society for American Soccer History, SASH, USsoccer.com, is an unbelievable resource for anyone who's looking for information. It cannot be, and the people that are in SASH as well, as a resource for people who are developing in the community. It's an incredibly giving community that would cooperate. So for example, when I first started, Gabe Logan wrote the book of Chicago soccer history. So I sent him an email. He immediately replied back to me. We met, I sat and went through his book and went through the notes of his book. And he sat with me and talked to me about this would be good for you, this would be good for you. And so you can find mentors. There are mentors within the soccer history community already.
Yeah, Chuck, you guys, this is a practical question. So, I'm from Tulsa. We have some history there with the NASL, Tulsa Roughnecks, and this is more of a relationship question. How do you justify the importance of sports relics in your relationship? Because I get people that are like, hey, I've got an NASL trash can and 13 Dr. Pepper bottles from 1983, and my lady's like, I don't want fucking 13 pop bottles in our house right now. Like, I don't care about the Jacksonville T-Man right now.
Right.
So if you have some like go-to lines to help convey the importance of soccer memorabilia and its preservation that can be relayed in a relationship healthy manner.
Curation is your friend. That
Okay.
word, curation. We are curating our archive.
Yeah, I would say that, right, I actually still have my Memphis Rogues and Cosmos NASL garbage buckets. They
Yeah.
used to sell in Soccer Digest, right?
Yeah.
Still got mine. Yeah, sometimes, like I said, when I log onto eBay, I'm wondering, is that mine? Yeah, it's on there. And I do kind of say, you know, when I kick the bucket, you can sell all this.
Okay.
It'll help. But again, I think that it has that kind of meaning, and that it's serving that purpose. Again, validates that a lot more. So yeah, the indulgence of my spouse, if you will, in
Right.
terms of physical space. When I started working with the Cosmos, suddenly it was, I get it. Yeah.
And that's part of having a central point, the club historian who
Yeah.
can say, you know, we are curating this exhibit, you know, so yes, your bottles are good. Here, we're gonna give them back to you when that's done. Because
Single
literally,
guy is like the optimal person for that. Right?
Well, yeah, my daughter got the hug Pelé, so
Nice.
So all those years of dealing with all that stuff.
Paid off.
Hey,
Was there another question?
Well, first, David, thank you for inviting me to the therapy session, I appreciate it. My name is Bo Morky, I'm a club director in New York, and I run Eastern Soccer, and so I want to share a story. So, a big Notre Dame fan, so go Irish tonight. But, so I went to the Notre Dame game at Yankee Stadium this past year. At Yankee Stadium's new small, maybe 2 of these rooms museum, Notre Dame brought their curators from Notre Dame. They drove over 60 artifacts, and they drove them. They wouldn't put them on a plane. That they're too, literally calling them priceless, and I don't disagree. And it was amazing because it was Newt Rockney's whistle. It was a letter from Babe Ruth to the president in 19 whatever, asking for tickets to the Notre Dame game at Yankee Stadium. No, at the Polo Grounds, sorry. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Very cool to see that. And I'm thinking about it for our club. My club is 48 years old, started by a Scouser in Liverpool, still owner and president of the club in New York. Really started in Connecticut because there was too much competition in New York, but now the club is a New York club. All of this stuff is at his house. Everything's in his basement. It's all there. It's in his basement. Email addresses, phone numbers, addresses, phone numbers of the people in back in 48 and 52 and whatever. And it would just require somebody, right, to hours upon days upon whatever, maybe multiples of people to sit there and build it out. But just the past 15 years of me being the director, just that connection is already historical. But it's a lot of time and effort.
It is.
And it's somebody to put their head down and grind through it. And then that president and or former players and directors, and actually in our youth world, a lot of parents, and like you guys were talking about the fans, in our world, our parents are the fans. So, okay, reaching out to those parents, what did you experience? What was it like going to Maryland? What was it like going to Florida? What was it like when we won a state championship or not, or whatever? And that would just take a lot of time and effort. But I think invaluable.
Exactly.
That's a great note to end it. It was Jack Huckle is in the back of the room. Jack, can you just tell everybody what your role has been institutionally as an historian?
There's the alarm.
Yeah, sorry.
I wrote the first constitution for SASH in 1992 as a helper to Sam Foulds, so, with Roger and Colin. And that was, so this is big meeting compared to those days, I want to tell you. A big meeting. And the one thing that I've learned since then, and I spent 10 years at the National Soccer Hall of Fame while it was in Oneonta, was the last one out the door. It's a heck of a claim to fame. Is you have no clue what the significance of it when you get it. It's just, you don't know. And so you hang on to it because it may or may not. But if you leave it behind, it will never become. And that's my wife, I'm older, it's time maybe to downsize. There's lots of stuff in my room that my wife is not quite appreciative of, but you don't know. So I'm excited to be here and to see all of you here. It's great. Kudos to David, to Tom McKay, to many others who have picked up the banner of SASH and really met the dreams we talked about in the early 90s. And, thanks for being a part of it.
Thank you. All right.
I can think no better note and no better speaker than Jack Huckle to bring it to a conclusion. So Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very, very much for coming. Oh, yeah.
Thanks, everyone.